you've got under 50% of a country, I believe it's 42% of a country, wasn't it, turning out to vote, that's not a success.
Yeah.
That's it just suits them.
There's never been a single election since the Welsh Parliament, formerly the Assembly, was created, where more than half the people have voted in Wales. Not one. Over 20 years. And 22 years now. Never managed to get up to 50% or indeed anywhere near it. And I forget now what the figure was that Labour got in the last election, but in 2016, I remember when I was elected, Labour got something like 33%. So 33% of 40%. It's pathetic. And yet Wales is a one-party state where only 17% of the voting public voted for the Welsh government, and yet they control everything as though it was Soviet Russia or North Korea.
And that they've brought out now, Neil, Race Equality Action Plan for Wales, and it's going through the motions now. The woman that's written it, Jane Hutt, guess what she is? A university professor from Swansea. Mark Drakeford started off in Swansea. You know, it's not what you know, it's actually who you know.
Well, you look at the members of the Welsh Parliament, and how many of them have ever had a proper job? And look at the Labour and Plaid Cymru benches, and you'll find hardly any of them has ever had a proper job. And they may have been academics, or they worked for the third sector, or some political organisation. They've never actually been involved in producing any wealth or doing anything which contributes to anything more than the sound battle, which is afflicting our ears. Jane Hutt is a perfectly nice middle-class lady who represents the Vale of Glamorgan. Her parents were Hampstead intellectuals, and that's where she grew up. And she's clueless, actually, absolutely clueless. And that's true of many of them. So I hope that document, by the way, has got perforated sheets, because I think that's probably all it's good for.
I'm actually keeping it in the shed so it gets a little damp.
Like one of the other things that we're looking at the moment is South Wales Police. They put everything online as well, haven't they? And it's basically about their now approach to Black Lives Matter, and they accept the fact that the South Wales Police is institutionally racist. They accept the fact that they need to give the BAME community more jobs, I suppose.
But I don't suppose they'd be very keen on giving the BAME community their own jobs.
No,
that would be the real test, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would be Neil. And again, another professor academic from Swansea is chairing this, and so you're supposed to have an impartial police force that makes its own decisions, is above government, and it's got a committee now that's telling it what to do, what to say, and how to improve its BAME mixture. Yeah. And yet, the white working class kid or underprivileged kid at school is just ignored, and they're by far the biggest social issue that we've got in Wales.
Well, we know that the most disadvantaged section of the community are white working class kids, especially those who come from broken homes. And this is not something which it's very polite to talk about, of course, in woke circles, because that just goes to show that the people who are loudest in their condemnation of racism are in fact fundamentally racist themselves.
Yeah. I'll bet that was the number one topic at Hampstead when she was growing up. About the white impoverished kids that died down the mines at 12 years of age.
Yeah. But the South Wales Police is not institutionally racist, but its leaders are institutionally idiotic, and that's what should concern us more than anything else.
Yeah, without a doubt. The people we've got leading Wales at the moment, the girls, the PCP Wales girls, they're still banging the drum, and they're getting a lot of support now as well, aren't they? They had a few guest speakers come down recently to the most recent demo, but they are, it's coming to movements like that who are going to educate the people and the parents, you know, regarding sex education, for example. This is something being brought in through the back door that nobody knows about. And when they do know about it, they kick off and the teachers deny it anyway, because the teachers don't even know about it at the moment. But it's, you know, it's consistent throughout that it's decision making. There's no, you know, these consultation periods aren't even put up there for people to actually have that consultation period. They're just
they're not interested in consultation. It's non-sultation, as we know. It's just a box-ticking exercise. And if you give the sort of opinions that they don't want to hear, then you'll just be parked in the wastepaper basket. Because all these exercises are pure formalities, and they have made up their minds even before they've started on the exercise. So again, that's institutionally lying, I think. The whole process is based upon a deceit.
Well, that was the Foreign Relief Road, wasn't it? You know, 4 reports and £20 million spent on writing. You know, even after the second report, you'd have got a bit, you'd have think the government's not pushing this, are they? But after the third one, then you knew that it's just wasting money. And of course, the same with sex education. Wasn't it 98% of people who were asked were against lowering the age of sex education in schools, and they ignored them?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. The party of the people has no interest in the real people. They've only an interest in their own preordained political agenda, and that's what Wales needs to wake up to.
Flicking back over to South Africa, Neil, and Africa as a whole, what do you think is how can they get out of this hole that they've created?
Well, there's no easy answer to that question, because the whole of world leadership now espouses the mindset which has produced the current state of so many of these countries. And so long as they're indulged in this fantasy world that their leaders live in, that money grows on trees, and that what really matters are these woke virtue signaling issues, not the hard graft of real life and wealth creation, then there is no way out of it. Fundamentally, what they've got to do is look at why Britain created the first industrial economy, and compared with its neighbours in the 18th century, produced wealth on an unimaginable scale. And 250 years later, we're still in the top 4 or 5 richest countries in the world. Real countries, I mean, as opposed to city-states like Singapore and so on. Africa will never get out of its problems unless it espouses the kind of capitalist economy which produced the wealth on which the West has built its current prosperity.
But they're going down the Chinese route, aren't they, Neil?
Of course. Mind you, the Chinese are one of the most capitalist countries in the world now. This is the paradox of the Chinese Communist Party. And because the Chinese Communist Party controls the country with an iron grip, they don't have any problems with trade unions in China, I can tell you. And they don't have any problems with woke issues in China either. You never hear of bending the knee in China, do you? Except bending the knee to Li Xiaoping. It's rather a different kettle of fish. But ultimately, a country can only improve by pulling itself up by its own bootstraps, not by foreign aid or any amount of virtue signalling, verbal support. What matters at the end of the day is hard graft, putting your shoulder to the wheel, and doing the job yourself. We know this from our own lives and our own country. And it's no different anywhere else in the world. But so long as people are indulged in believing that it's all the fault of colonialism or racism or prejudice or whatever, then they're going to continue fooling themselves and get nowhere.
Yeah. Interesting question there, or topic raised up. Haven't the white farmers been invited to Russia as refugees? Now, but they are refugees. If they were to be fleeing now, that's it's not like the ones fleeing France.
They actually have, because what Russia has recognised. When the state suddenly took all the farms off the farmers and they couldn't produce the grain and everything else that the farmers used to be able to, they lost that skill set. And of course, what they've done with South Africa is they've given them vast quantities of land in Russia and said farm away, and they'd be a fool not to.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I think, just to touch on the Dover crossings at the moment then, Priti Patel, you've actually made a petition and it's doing quite well, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's slowing down a little bit now.
It's up to 6,000 now.
6,000, but basically you said a long time ago they need to process them offshore in one of those old cruise liners. Priti Patel is now singing that song. Do you have much faith in her?
Well, she talks the talk, of course, but she doesn't have the power to make the government dance to her tune. What we do know is that since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, he's gaily announced that 5 million Hong Kong Chinese have the right to come to this country if they want to exercise it, without thinking for a moment about how we might house them or where we're going to find jobs for them, etc. 5 million people could potentially exercise the right the British government has now promised them. And I mean, Hong Kong is a wonderful place, and it's a massive generator of wealth, of course, and a lot of these people would have a great deal to contribute to this country. But we've added 7 million people to our population in Britain in the last 20 years. 7 million people that we've got to find homes for, hospital places, school places, etc. And the middle class Liberals of Cheshire and Amersham voted the Tories out a few weeks ago in the by-election because of concreting over the countryside, as well as the HS2 railway line that goes through that constituency. But these are the people, the Liberals, who they voted for, who believe in unrestricted immigration. So they want more concreting over the countryside. They can't get enough of immigration into this country, especially if people have got different coloured skins, because that shows how diverse we'll become and multicultural and all the rest of it.
A 1 in, 2 out policy, Neil.
Sorry?
I have a 1 in, 2 out policy. So everyone that comes in from Hong Kong, we've already got 3 million that are just disappeared into the ether. So we could actually get rid of 3 million who are not here legally. Well, the truth of the matter is we've no idea how many illegal immigrants there are in this country. As a result of the vaccination program, we discovered that 1.5 million more people applying for vaccines than we thought were here. And the Office for National Statistics the other day found that there were 6 to 7 million EU citizens in the UK, whereas they thought there'd only been 3 million. So, I mean, this is absurd, isn't it? And these are the figures upon which the government plans its public policy decisions about how many schools we need, how many hospitals we need, etc. So the whole thing is wonky from the start. But one thing that we know is that this country is now one of the most densely populated countries in Europe. And 410 people per square kilometre in England, and that's more densely populated than Holland, and twice as the population density of Germany, and 3 times the population density of France. So we really need to start thinking in terms of what the whole of the referendum was about, was taking back control and taking back control of our borders to start with. Full marks to Priti Patel for coming up with her latest
raft of policies which we've been pushing for years and years and years and ignored by the Tories who've been in government since 2010. Now at least she's woken up to it, but whether it'll be enforced at the end of the day, who knows? All these illegal immigrants are here because the rules have not been enforced. There isn't the will to enforce them, as we know, because the wokies basically control the government. Boris Johnson, when he was the Mayor of London, called for an amnesty for all illegal immigrants.
Yes.
That's who we've got running the country. So if you think that this Tory government under Boris the buffoon as Prime Minister is going to take any serious action, I think you're sadly deluded.
Well, it's of course Mrs. Johnson that runs the place now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Carrie Antoinette, yes indeed. She has the gold wallpaper at £850 a roll.
I think the funny thing was about that Prime Minister's questions where he talked about, I believe it was the deadline on the day, and they talked about, how many more applications they've had compared to how many people they thought. And I remember watching Boris Johnson actually trying to spin that as a positive. But I'm thinking, you don't, surely, you wouldn't broadcast that anyway. You keep that, you'd be like, shit. You put that on the table, we won't mention that, and then just deal with it in the background, because that's what you expect from the Tories. But to try to spin it in a positive, it shows exactly how conservative they are.
But I mean, it's not just the number of Europeans that are here, it's who. And of course, it's the Albanians. Well, the Albanians are actually only famous for one thing.
Not winning the World Cup.
And it's not winning the World Cup, no.
And controlling the vice industry in London, of course. They took over from the mafia in Soho.
So, we're coming towards the end of the time with you now. What's next for Neil Hamilton then? Obviously, we've had the Senate elections now. I think, I think that shocked a lot of people, the way it turned out. And the state that the Senate is now left in, where there's nobody slightly right to far left in there, I think Wales is in a very dangerous position. So, what would you say is next for yourself?
Well, at the age of 72, I'm not sure, of course. Eternity, possibly, but I'm trying to postpone that as long as possible. I haven't a clue, in fact, but I'm still, of course, in politics. I'm still the leader of UKIP in the United Kingdom, and we haven't had politics in the last 18 months, have we, because of the COVID hysteria, deliberately engineered by governments, whether it's at Westminster or Cardiff, Edinburgh or whatever, in order to suffocate political debate in this country, which they very successfully did. But real politics is bound to revive sooner or later, and then the issues that we've been talking about on this programme today will come to the fore yet again. And I've been around a very long time. I fought my first parliamentary election way back in 1974 as a candidate, but the very first election I was ever involved in was in 1964, so that's nearly 60 years ago, and I've seen the political pendulum go back and forth, and sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down, and so long as you keep in the game, not that it's a game, of course, it's much more serious than that, then there's a chance of making progress. So I still believe in all the issues that I've devoted my life to fighting for, which is basically the interests of ordinary people against the state establishment, and fighting for basic freedoms and liberties, and creating a decent society for everybody. And that's what I'll continue to do. And I weep for Wales that we've never known anything other than a Labour government since devolution. And what a pathetic shower of people they are. Absolutely useless and clueless. A minority government in terms of votes, they're big time. But because of the voting system, which they, of course, engineered in the last election to reduce the voting age to 16 because they thought that kids with no experience of life were more likely to vote for them. And they gave votes to foreigners because they thought that they'd be more likely to vote for them. and whether that actually benefited them or not, who knows? But fundamentally, the people of Wales seem to just accept their position as hopeless and helpless. But there's a lot you can do about it. All you need to do is vote the buggers out. And it couldn't be easier, really. Put your X on the ballot paper for somebody who's going to disrupt the system. We need a Donald Trump in Wales. I did my best to try and provide that.
Yeah.
Didn't work, but there you go. But I'm still keen to carry on where we left off on the 6th of May.
Yeah.
A couple of things. It looks as though Drakeford is going to be pushing this universal wage, and I've suggested that if he thinks it's such a good idea, all the ministers and all the Senate members should all be paid that, and tip up their own wages, which would make a net profit.
Yeah.
And secondly, with Carrie Antoinette, do you think that she would say to the peasants, "Let them eat corn"?
Yeah. Well, I don't know what goes on in her head, but there we are. It's something perhaps best left not speculated on.
Absolutely. I think lastly, the only thing I want to touch on just very quickly, and it's these lockdown protests. Now, I've seen a few conversations in the chat about people heading to London again for the 19th, because this is the new Freedom Day take 3, I think, is it? So a lot of people are going to London. Now, I think personally, time is wasted going there if you're Welsh, because if it's successful on the 19th and Boris actually does do what he says, which probably won't happen, Wales are still going to be under extraordinarily strict lockdown rules, as we still are. So I would strongly advise, if there's going to be any protesting, it should be at the Senate and people should go after their own doors. But on that note, do you think is going to lift restrictions on the 19th, or do you think there's going to be, all of a sudden a big boost in cases and my hands are tied, I can't do anything?
Well, he clearly wants to, but he's so weak. He has all these people, the medical bureaucrats in the background who are prophesying doom and gloom. Sajid Javid, I think, is very keen to distance himself from his predecessors for very obvious reasons, and to open up the country, and he's quite right too. But Boris seems to be pretty weak in response to that. I'm sure the government will carry on hectoring us into wearing masks, and I have no intention whatsoever of wearing masks after the 19th, any more than I have done really in the last 12 months. And when you look at the figures, there's been a huge rise in the number of COVID cases, but almost no rise in the number of deaths. I mean, the number of deaths supposedly related to COVID, of course, you can't believe the statistics, which have vastly exaggerated the impact of COVID on deaths. There's been almost no deaths going on since the middle of February. And there's no case whatsoever for continuing any of these restrictions for a moment longer. And I think the people need to wake up and rise in revolt, just as we did in the Brexit referendum. Let's show our rulers who really is in charge in this country.
Well, I don't know if you know, this might be breaking news to you, Neil, but we've been served with court papers now, so we're thinking of calling you as a star witness.
Right.
or even, what about representation?
Representation. We've got a fine through for breaches of COVID. It's called Sleepless Nights, hasn't it, Dan?
Oh, it's unbelievably sleepless nights. Yeah, horrendous.
Well, I'll be there for you.
Excellent. Yeah.
I'm needed.
It's really funny as well, because we were doing stuff with yourself at the same time. So during the 3 fines, so say we got 3 fines,
Yeah.
in the middle of the 3 fines, we were doing other activities in Tenby, in Penally.
Yeah.
We didn't get fined for any of